Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker. And in this video, we need to talk about Watchtower accusing me, yours truly, of hate speech. You must forgive me, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. This is all very recent, but in the last few hours, it's come to my attention that back in February, 7 months ago, Watchtower tried to get me thrown off IICSA, the Independent Investigation into Child Sexual Abuse for England and Wales, on the grounds of hate speech. And I refer you to a letter dated 28th of August 2020, which has only in the last few hours been published on IICSA's website. It's all a bit complicated and I'm going to do my best to explain, but one of the things it says in that letter, because I want to assure you that I'm not just doing like a clickbait thing, this is genuine. One of the things it says on page 2 of the letter is on 4th of February 2020, CCJW, that's the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, applied to the Inquiry to remove Lloyd Evans as a core participant because of extreme public statements he made against Jehovah's Witnesses, which might constitute hate speech. CCJW's letter included an 8-page attachment which quoted verbatim from Mr. Evans's statements. And then on the next page of the letter, it simply says, on 7th of February 2020, the inquiry declined to revoke Mr. Evans's core participant status. Now, I have made a request through my lawyer for this letter dated February 4th, 2020. I want to know on what basis I'm being accused of hate speech. Needless to say, it's very rich coming from an organisation that calls former members mentally diseased and more recently corrupted in mind. Coming from an organisation that uses that sort of language against former members, I quite frankly take this as a compliment. In fact, I think I am the first individual apostate in history to be accused by Watchtower of hate speech. They did this a few months ago with Reclaimed Voices in the Netherlands, but that was obviously a group that they were describing as spewing hate speech. Now they've named me specifically and they've said, and here's an 8-page dossier of things Lloyd Evans has said that are extreme and might constitute hate speech. Again, fascinated to know what they've managed to dig up. Needless to say, anything that I say on this channel that is of a critical nature is aimed at the leadership, the people who wield power over Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not aimed at Jehovah's Witnesses as people or as individuals who I actually have a great deal of affection and sympathy for. I wouldn't make these videos if I didn't care about Jehovah's Witnesses and feel bad about them being lied to and exploited by their leaders. It seems to me we're simply dealing with an organisation that cannot stand any form of criticism and any form of questioning that it doesn't like. And to that end, you may be wondering where all of this has come from. I mentioned the inquiry. You might be thinking, what led Watchtower to include your name in this letter? Why is this only just coming to light now, months after they tried to get you thrown out of IICSA on grounds of hate speech? It's all a little bit complicated. I'll try to explain it. We will be doing a Watchtower in Focus special on this, so anything that I miss out in this video will hopefully be covered in the forthcoming Watchtower in Focus episode. Needless to say, this all relates to some questions that Paul Gillies was asked at the end of his evidence by a panel member of the inquiry named Ivor Frank. So Paul Gillies is the official world headquarters spokesperson for Jehovah's Witnesses. He's the head of the OPI, the Office of Public Information. He gave evidence over Zoom link, as we all did, on August 10th, and then he came back on the next day on August 11th. And as far as I'm concerned, he got a fairly easy ride from the inquiry's lawyer, Fiona Scolding. It left a lot to be desired as far as I'm concerned. I realised Fiona Scolding was doing her best. Paul Gillies probably would feel differently. He would feel as though perhaps some of the questions he was asked perhaps made him feel uncomfortable. But by and large, it was by no means a repeat of Angus Stewart versus Jeffrey Jackson. It was actually quite lame as far as I'm concerned, right up until the final few seconds when the chair, Professor Alexis Jay, asked the other members of the inquiry panel whether they had any questions. And out of nowhere, inquiry panel member Ivor Frank asked Paul Gillies the following.
Do you know a person called Sean Bartlett as a records management overseer?
Yes, I do.
Did he come to give a seminar to elders in England in 2017?
Yes, he did.
Did you attend that?
I think I did. I can't recall it specifically.
You might recall it if you remember the content of the seminar. Can you remember what the purpose of the seminar was?
To help us to make sure that our record keeping was up to date with legislation and that we weren't keeping unnecessary documents.
Not keeping unnecessary documents. Do you mean that he advised you to get rid of some documents?
Well, of course, at that time and even now we have data protection matters, so we have to make sure that documents adhere to data protection issues. So yes, he would have advised along those lines.
My next question is, do you have a data retention policy that you have published?
We have a data retention policy. Have we published it? I don't know.
In any event, you were at the seminar in 2017 where Sean Bartlett, among other things, advised you how to keep and how to get rid of documents.
Yes.
Did he, in the course of that seminar, tell you that the reason for getting rid of documents was because Satan was coming after you? Satan in the form of the legal process.
Okay. His comments, as I say, were directed with regard to data protection issues, as I recall. I don't remember exactly what he said on the subject. No, I don't remember any comments about Satan particularly.
You know whether there is a record anywhere of that seminar, of what was said?
I'd have to find out for you.
Do that and please let us know. Thank you very much.
So I can remember listening in on this exchange as it was happening at the time. Obviously, I am an IICSA core participant. I have an interest in what's going on with these proceedings. I can remember feeling it was a bit awkward for Paul Gillies. I didn't think it was devastating. I thought it kind of hinted at the fact that there is more to all of this than meets the eye, than perhaps Paul Gillies was suggesting in his evidence. But it wasn't necessarily some devastating revelation. Incidentally, Ivor Frank was referring to a records management meeting that was actually filmed. The video was leaked by a Bethel insider, and it came to be reported on by the Philadelphia Inquirer. And here is the part of the video that Ivor Frank was referring to.
The question is, why has this come up? Why is it that we have records management now? We've been functioning as an organization for years. Well, we know that the scene of this world is changing, and we know Satan's coming after us, and he's going to go for us legally. We can see by the way things are shaping up. So the organization has said, we've run into difficulties in the past because of the records we have. So the coordinators committee said, we want a systematic way to handle records at all branches.
So this was damning footage that the Philadelphia Inquirer, as I mentioned, reported on under the heading, Watch, Jehovah's Witnesses official says to destroy records because Satan's coming after us. What this video did was it at least hinted at the organization destroying records under the assumption that Satan was against, or Satan is against the organization and is wanting to undermine the organization legally. And records are a way, documents are a way that Satan can get at the organization. So we need to make sure that there are no records that Satan can get at us with. Did this video suggest that Jehovah's Witnesses are destroying records related to child sex abuse? Well, not necessarily. And in fact, there are a couple of points in the video. I'll be showing more of the video in our Watchtower in Focus episode. There are a couple of points in the video where Sean Bartlett alludes to records not being destroyed if there is a legal reason to hold on to them. But what you have is two considerations. Number one, keeping hold of records in case they are legally required. And number two, not having records that could cause the organization harm, that could make the organization in some way liable for paying out vast sums of money. We'll get into that in the Watchtower in Focus episode. But it was a damning piece of video footage. Paul Gillies, as you saw there, was asked to produce a record of what happened in the meeting so that they could ascertain what was said. Obviously, Ivor Frank saw at least some of this video, so he knew when he was asking this question that this video existed, because we later find out that he'd done his own personal research and come across the footage on the Philadelphia Inquirer website. But nonetheless, there is a 57-minute raw, unabridged video that IICSA doesn't have, that they evidently would like to have, so that they can find out exactly what was said in this meeting. Ivor Frank, you saw there, asked Paul Gillies to produce any records or any information that the organisation has about this meeting. Paul Gillies said he would do that. But what happened then? Bear in mind, this exchange happened on August 11th. We now know that there was an exchange of correspondence starting with a letter dated August 13th, 2020, in which it was said that, well, I'll read it. In his questions, Mr. Frank alleged that at that 2017 seminar, elders in England were counselled to get rid of documents, and that the reason for getting rid of documents was because Satan was coming after you, Satan in the form of the legal process. I ask you, viewers, go back, watch the series of questions with Ivor Frank and Paul Gillies, and see whether that accurately describes the exchange. It doesn't. Ivor Frank made no allegations. He made no accusations. He simply asked questions of Paul Gillies as to what was said at the meeting. Granted, they were somewhat leading questions because Ivor Frank wanted to get to the point quickly. He obviously had the whole thing in mind and he wanted some kind of verification from Paul Gillies as to what had gone on. But there were no allegations, if you think about it. It was just a series of questions. But this organisation cannot stand being asked certain questions that they feel expose the organisation or cause the organisation some kind of reputational damage. And what becomes very clear when you read this exchange, this flurry of correspondence between CCJW and IICSA, is that they feel that, quote, irreparable damage and harm was done to the organisation by Ivor Frank, and they even go as far as to ask IICSA to take down the live stream footage from IICSA's YouTube channel showing this exchange taking place. They are all about information control. They do not want ordinary witnesses or ordinary members of the public to go on YouTube and be able to see Ivor Frank asking these questions of Paul Gillies. Anyway, there was this exchange of correspondence. We'll go into it more in our Watchtower in Focus. And the IICSA inquiry wasn't giving CCJW the response that CCJW wanted. CCJW wanted the footage taken down, and they wanted answers. Where has Ivor Frank got this information from? It seems that CCJW read one tweet on Jason Wynn's Twitter feed and leapt to the assumption that I, together with Mark O'Donnell and Jason Wynn, had given this leaked footage to Ivor Frank, and that's what prompted Ivor Frank to ask those questions. In other words, they assumed in their paranoid thinking that this was all some kind of rigged thing where Ivor Frank, as an inquiry panel member, was in cahoots with me and Mark O'Donnell and Jason Wynn, based purely on what Jason Wynn said in this tweet. In actual fact, it was nothing of the kind. Ivor Frank did his own research. He came across the Philadelphia Inquirer article. He watched the video, and he had justifiable questions to ask of Paul Gillies. So anyway, you have this remarkable exchange of correspondence. All of this is available, by the way, on the IICSA website. A link will be in the description. And then finally, on the 28th of August, CCJW does two things. First of all, Paul Gillies finally comes back to the inquiry with sort of an answer to Ivor Frank's question. He says, I have inquired of the Britain branch office, and they inform me that they do not have any recording of the presentation. So he doesn't deny that a recording was made. He doesn't really comment on the recording, because when you watch the video, it's clear that someone was in the room recording it quite obviously. It doesn't seem to have been surreptitiously recorded in any way. But his answer is, oh, well, the Britain branch office doesn't have a recording. Of course, that doesn't mean there isn't a recording elsewhere. It's a big organisation, isn't it? So I think he's being, well, at best, he's being very economical with the truth. And at worst, he's flat out lying. I personally think it's very unlikely that nowhere on the hard drives at the Chelmsford office is there any MP4 or movie file of this 57-minute records management meeting. So anyway, that's the official answer that Paul Gillies gives. And then you get this remarkable 6-page letter from Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, which includes it. I still haven't quite figured out why they needed to mention me. It's not like their request for me to be stricken as a core participant has any real relevance to Ivor Frank's questioning. I think they're just trying to paint a picture of IICSA being biased, or IICSA dealing with them unfairly, by not rolling over to every request that the organisation has made. And in that context, they've mentioned this request that they made back in February, again 7 months ago. This would have been only a month before the normal proceedings were supposed to begin. The whole thing got postponed due to COVID-19. But on 4th of February, I was only a month away from flying out to England to actually participate in the hearings. And I just find it astonishing. Well, not astonishing, I suppose it's predictable, but I devoted so many weeks to preparing voluminous written evidence detailing exactly what the problems are with Jehovah's Witnesses and child protection. All of it is obviously available on IICSA's website. And there was a little bit of a back and forth between myself and the other XJW core participants and Paul Gillies. But Paul Gillies didn't really answer any of the criticisms. He sort of alluded to one or two, but certainly when it came to my arguments against the organisation, at no point did I think, oh, he's got me there. He didn't even really try, Paul Gillies, to answer the problems that I identified in my evidence. Now I know why it was that he couldn't be bothered to answer my evidence. It was because they decided, oh, well, never mind answering this guy, let's just get him thrown off. And then we don't have to answer anything. Then we can basically just ignore and expect IICSA to ignore everything that he's written because he's been thrown off. Fortunately, IICSA didn't pay any attention to that. But it's just an astonishing letter. Again, they really, really, really do not like Ivor Frank's questioning. They believe that it has caused irreparable harm. I'm not exaggerating, by the way. Irreparable harm to the reputation of Paul Gillies, to the legitimate interests of Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. Ivor Frank's questioning was designed to humiliate Mr. Gillies, Mr. Bartlett, the Britain branch office, and individual elders of Jehovah's Witnesses by implying that each of them committed a very serious crime. Again, there was no implication. There was no accusation. It was just some questions that Paul Gillies was given an opportunity to answer. And because Paul Gillies was caught out and was clearly and visibly uncomfortable by the questioning, they've decided that it's all an attack and something that needs to be shut down, something that needs to be, quote, contained. Do they use that sort of language? Here we are, it's in paragraph 9. This included a request that the inquiry temporarily stop dissemination of the video footage containing Mr. Frank's question until the matter was resolved. CCJW asked that Mr. Frank answer 4 questions concerning his live stream allegation so that they could bottom out the controversy and contain the damage. It's astonishing. And by the way, these 4 questions were incredibly hypocritical. Imagine you were a Jehovah's Witness hauled before a judicial committee on an accusation of porneia, and imagine you were to reply, well, where have you got this information from? I want all information and records and names connected with your knowledge of this accusation. And if you don't come back to me with this information by an arbitrary deadline, I'm going to pursue my legal options against you. I kid you not, that was the tone of the requests that were made by CCJW of IICSA. Absolutely astonishing. And then you got this notice of determination by IICSA, quite a lengthy document, 13 pages, dated 21st of September 2020, in which Professor Alexis J. declined the request for Mr. Frank to recuse himself from this investigation on the grounds that it is neither necessary nor appropriate for him to do so. They were convinced, CCJW, that Ivor Frank was biased, that he was in league with myself, Mark O'Donnell, Jason Wynn, ex-JWs, that it was all some kind of ambush, they used the word ambush, some kind of trap to humiliate Paul Gillies, to make the organisation look bad. And ironically, all they have done by making a big deal about all this is made it possible for me to talk about it. If they had just stayed quiet, if Paul Gillies had just issued a statement saying, yes, we had that meeting, here is the video, it clearly doesn't expressly call for the destruction of records related to child sex abuse. In any event, the comments about Satan were the personal opinions of Sean Bartlett and not necessarily the opinions of Jehovah's Witnesses or the governing body. He could have made all sorts of statements that sort of could have placated IICSA. But this is an organisation that is deluded. This is an organisation that demands respect from everyone and considers there to be no legitimate grounds of criticism and no legitimate grounds for holding it accountable. So any kind of questions they don't like, they will answer with fire and brimstone, and they will try and crush any criticism whatsoever. So we're dealing with an organisation that, because it's so deluded, they cannot help but shoot themselves in the foot by, in this case, causing a huge ruckus over Ivor Frank's questions, which has incidentally led me to find out that they accused me of hate crimes back in February. I've asked my lawyer, Richard Scorer, to formally request the letter in question. I would love to see the 8-page dossier of verbatim quotes of me issuing hate speech in the past. And once I have that document, I'm going to chase it by hook or by crook. Once I have that document, I will be making a part 2 to this video so that you'll know exactly what my hate speech is. Again, we're going to be going into this whole thing in more detail in our forthcoming Watchtower in Focus episode, so please catch that if you can. But yeah, that's it, folks. I am officially guilty of hate speech, according to the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please, as always, don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.